Hi, welcome to Total Training for Adobe Illustrator Creative Cloud Edition. My name is Bob Flisser, and I am excited to show you all the great things you can do with the world's #1 drawing program. Whether you have strong artistic talent or not, Adobe Illustrator has the tools you need to get your ideas out of your head onto the page and change them around until you have what you want. We'll start by talking about how Illustrator fits into the grand scheme of life and how to understand what's happening on the screen. Then you'll be ready to do your drawings and designs right out of the starting gate. I've made this course using both Windows and Macintosh, so you'll be right at home whichever one you use. And I'm also going to show you a lot of keyboard shortcuts, so be sure and download the quick reference guide that I made for you. Are you ready to get started? Okay, let's go.
Before we actually get started clicking around in Illustrator and using it, I want you to understand really two things. Number one, where does Illustrator fit into the world? And the second thing is, how does Illustrator work as opposed to other types of graphic programs? So let's talk about the different types of graphic programs. If you want to split the world of graphic programs into two types or two categories, well, there's any number of ways you could do it. You might say inexpensive and expensive, or made by Adobe and not made by Adobe. But the way I like to group them is by how they work, and that is vector-based and raster-based. And raster, sometimes called bitmap or image. I tend to use those phrases interchangeably. Let's talk about vector first. Vector images are drawn on a computer. That means someone sits down on a computer, like you are now, and take a mouse or a drawing tablet or maybe a touchpad and draw something. That means that the artwork created in vector programs are not real life. They're like paintings, just very sophisticated electronic paintings.
The shapes created in vector programs are just mathematical formulas.
Let's say a square, for example. A square has length and it has width, and you can have they're both the same, of course, if it's a square. You can have the length and width bigger, you can have the length and width smaller. Maybe you have a circle that has a radius, also maybe has a height and width if it's maybe a squashed circle, an oval. So these are just mathematical formulas that the computer uses to represent what those shapes are. So again, these are not real. And the third thing you should know is that graphics in vector programs have no resolution. Let's take that square or circle I was just talking about. You could have a square that's maybe 1 inch by 1 inch, or 10 inches by 10 inches, or 10 feet by 10 feet. Hey, a square is a square. It's just more inches or more feet. So the computer takes care of all of the math for you. You don't have to worry about it. But that's why there is no resolution, just different shapes. Raster images are different. Rasters are photos or scans. Could be a photo that you take with a camera, or maybe a cell phone. Maybe you have flat artwork that you put on a scanner and scan in. That means that rasters can be real life. You could take a picture of your friends, and whether it's with a camera or on a scanner, that's simply sliced and diced into many, many columns and many, many rows of pixels. We'll talk about pixels in a little bit of detail in a moment. The shapes themselves that you see in a raster or bitmap program, well, they look like shapes, but they're really just pixels. Think of maybe grains of sand on a beach, right? You can go to the beach and you can take your finger and draw a shape on there, but there's really nothing to hold on to. There's nothing to pull around because they're just pixels on the page. They're not really glued together, but you do need to know how many pixels per inch or per millimeter or centimeter there are. So that's why, unlike with vector graphics, raster graphics, resolution is very important. You always need to know, okay, if I'm going to print this out, what resolution do I need for a printer? Or if I'm going to take my artwork and put it up on the web or put it in a PowerPoint presentation, what resolution do I need? How many of those pixels are there per inch or whatever unit of measure you're looking at? There's no such thing when you're dealing with vector graphics. Okay, so that's all well and good, but where does Adobe Illustrator fit into this world? Let's talk about vector programs first, because that's why we're here. Of course, there is Adobe Illustrator, which I think is the best one, but it's not the only one. Adobe Freehand is another popular one. Adobe inherited Freehand from Macromedia. That's why Adobe has two vector programs. Flash, which Adobe also inherited from Macromedia, is for animation, and you've probably seen plenty of animation on the web. A lot of that was created in Adobe Flash. CorelDRAW is also another powerful illustration program, not as popular as it used to be. SketchUp is more of a consumer-grade program, and Inkscape is a free and open source illustration program. So what about image editors? Well, in the raster image world, there's Adobe Photoshop. Now, a lot of people say to me, okay, which is a better program? Is Illustrator better than Photoshop, or should I use Photoshop and not Illustrator? And usually my answer is they're both good. You should know both of them because they both do different things, and they're kind of opposite sides of the same coin. Later in the course, I'll show you how you can use Illustrator and Photoshop together. They do work and play nicely. And there are also some very good Photoshop courses right here in the Total Training Library. Adobe also has a product called Lightroom. And if you're a photographer, whether amateur or professional, Lightroom does a very good job of managing and manipulating dozens and dozens or hundreds of photos all at once. Corel Painter also has been around for a long time. It's a pretty powerful program. AC/DC is mostly for cataloging and image management, but it does have some editing capabilities. The lowly Microsoft Paint that comes with Windows, that is an image editor. And Irfan View, kind of hard to pronounce, is an open source free image editor that a lot of people like. Okay, so let's say you have a simple shape. We'll take a look at a curve. How does a curve look and behave differently in a vector or illustration program as opposed to an image and raster program? Let's take a look at a close-up. Now, here's a curve, very smooth, and when you zoom in, no matter how closely you zoom in, it's still smooth. And then you can take your mouse and very easily yank the curve around one way or another, and that's how you can reshape the curve. Image editors, raster programs, are very different. You can have the same smooth curve, and it looks smooth, but as you zoom in, it starts getting fuzzier and more pixelated until finally you can see the pixels themselves. And you can't yank it around with your mouse because you can't yank those pixels. You could take maybe an eraser tool and erase the line, and then maybe a brush tool, and then you can sort of brush in, paint in more pixels. And that's something you do in Photoshop quite often, but that's the way you do it in an image editor because you can't just yank those pixels around. Again, think of trying to yank grains of sand around on the beach. So now that you understand how and where Illustrator fits into the world, we're ready to start using it, and we'll do that in the next lesson.